responses I get when I ask a question. And somebody wrote about their fear of rejection and abandonment. And boy, don't we all know that, right? Isn't that part of the human condition? We all have some fear of that. So what I wanted to look at is the way that the divine, our true nature, is lining up with us, conspiring to help us grow through our fears. I mean, that's kind of like a, what do we call, counterintuitive? Like we think, oh no, this fear is in me, it's something about me. And yet, what if that fear is there designed to help us look at life in a different way? Right, that is the possibility that's there. And one of the ways we know that is through this idea of projective identification, which helps us see life in a different way. So with projective identification, what is unconscious in us, or we can think of it as unfinished or even unacceptable, things that we don't like, what we've disowned in us, we then put out there in the world and others. And the opportunity, if we look at it from a yogic perspective, is for us to be able to see ourselves. Because remember, this spiritual perspective is that there is only one, that all is one. But then we separate and we live out of our fears and our upsets. So our fear is, oh, you're going to reject me, you're going to abandon me. But what if I have to then look at what's unfinished in me, the fear of rejection or abandonment. What's unfinished in me would be that I feel abandoned. So then the question is, how can I not abandon myself? I'm looking for the external world to fill that need in me. And I talk about this in a number of my writings about the developmental task of becoming an adult. As a child, I shouldn't have been abandoned. I should have had my needs met. But if I didn't, how am I going to be there for myself now? Right? This is true with so many. I just talked to 3 sets of couples last week about this very dilemma. How am I going to be there for myself? I want you to fill this need in me, but what can I do to be there for myself? So if, as this person said, my fear is abandonment and rejection, where do I look inside myself to see how can I no longer, or even in small steps, not abandon myself? Now, one of the beautiful things about projective identification, I'm not sure if it's beautiful, but one of the ways it really helps us grow and develop is that we see it out there. I'm saying to you, don't abandon me, don't reject me. That allows me to see, bring it to light and see it inside of myself. It's easier that way to see, rather than inside of us. We get so used to it and habituated to it. But what if I begin to see that what I am struggling with is out there as a way to take it back? So then there's a relief of being able to actually work with it rather than thinking it's the truth about it. So where could you, in a small way, be there for yourself? Like if you are used to saying negative things about yourself, is that a way of abandoning yourself? If somebody treated you like that, said those things to you, how would you feel? Terrible. So why are you saying that to yourself? Why am I saying those things to myself? That's the question we begin to look at. How can I shift that pattern in me so that I can have a different experience of myself? It's not the easiest thing, I know that. But when I start befriending myself in that way, being kinder to myself, even recognizing and naming that that's there, I can begin to look at the difference. In yoga psychology, one of the fundamental beliefs is that level of ignorance is what creates most of our suffering. So the ignorance in this is, am I willing to look at how I have separated myself from myself? How have I separated myself from the goodness in me, the kindness in me? And how is life, prana, the life force, trying to orient me in a new direction so that I can get back home to myself? So if I rejecting myself or abandoning myself, or if I'm afraid the world is going to do that, there's a way that I'm doing that inside myself. What do I want to really stand for and recognize? What value do I want to live from? And I'm saying this, that this is easy, and I want to just say it's not. It takes practice, and it takes aligning with ourselves, because coming back into that, we're so used to being pulled out of who we are that it's hard to come back and align with what I call the vertical axis. But each of us, even though we might not talk about it, has some connection to the divine, some connection to spirit in some way, and we all call it different things, different traditions, different paths, but there's something in us that yearns for that union, because that is a return to ourselves, a return not to our personality, but to the wholeness, the allness that we are. There's also the grounding into the earth, the deep mother, and being connected all alongside ourselves. That's what my heart bathing meditations are all about, is landing us back in our heart, the center of our being, so that we can then be in relationship with the world outside. So it's being connected inside so that we can also be connected outside. And this is the reverse, and I talk about this in the developmental task of being an adult versus the developmental task of a child. A child should have had their needs met from the outside. That's just how a child survives, is getting needs met from out there. But psychologically, we need to, as an adult, if we didn't get those needs met, learn how to be there with ourselves and what we need and want now, so that we can then be in relationship with the world out there. So I hope this helps. I'm going to start going through step by step all the different comments that people made one by one, and see if what I'm offering can help you to return back home to yourself, to find your own sense of goodness and safeness inside yourself, to take a deep breath and remember that you're not alone, that we're not abandoning you. The question is, can you also stand by yourself? The great analyst Winnicott said, when you're there with yourself, you're no longer alone. It's so powerful, isn't it? When you're there with yourself, you're no longer alone. And that means reuniting the parts of us that feel separate and distant or afraid with who we actually are. The greatness of that, the hugeness, the vastness, the unknowable part of us that we're returning to. I'd love to hear what you think, and if this is helpful, and I'll continue doing more. Sending you lots of blessings.